The time for floating LNG has come. Last 8 years, we did 3 floating LNGs. And in the last 2 years, we signed 2, we are building those 2. And the next 2, we believe that we will do another 3, 4 more.
Hello, I'm Ed Reed from E-FWD, and I'm here today with Narsingh from Black Veatch. Narsingh, how are you? How are you finding ADIPEC?
Thank you so much. This is my first time I'm attending ADIPEC, and I must say, this is not just busy. I'm overwhelmed with the number of participants here and the energy here.
Yeah. Look, let's get straight into it. LNG, it feels like there's a lot of interest in LNG at the moment, but it also feels like there's a sort of a price question coming. And it feels like, people are talking about, a potential glut sort of, 26, 27. What are your thoughts about that?
It's a supply and demand issue, right? If you look at, we're talking of energy transition, and a couple of years back, people felt that you don't need hydrocarbons for energy transition. Renewables alone will be able to solve that problem. That narrative has shifted, and people have realized that there is no energy transition without having hydrocarbons, and LNG is a big player there. The way I look at LNG today, it's not just a transition fuel. I believe it's a base fuel. It's not a replacement completely for clean molecules, but what it does is basically give you the kind of sustainability in a manner where reliability and availability is nicely balanced. We are seeing the industry going through a complete transformation. So a couple of years back, you'd see maybe 1 or 2 projects getting announced. And in just the last 2 years, we have seen multiple projects being announced, and the demand for LNG has never been as high as we are seeing it today. I believe this will continue to at least maybe for another 1.5, 2 decades. And the time for LNG industry is now, actually. So we are very excited to be in this industry.
It does. It feels like there's a lot of FIDs, isn't it, at the moment? I feel there's a lot of interest going into it, particularly in the US Gulf Coast. What are your thoughts about the geography of LNG?
So all the projects that we are doing, and with Preco technology, we have been able to scale the Preco technology on floating LNG. We are the market leaders with 60-70% market share. We are seeing investments, of course, happening in the Gulf Coast, but there's a lot of interest in Canada. There is a lot of interest in Latin America, Argentina. There are places in Africa where there is a lot of gas available, and the best way to monetize those gases in those places is to build those LNG plants. Now, you could do it with onshore facilities, which, of course, with the remoteness and all the challenges, whatever is there, is extremely challenging from a capex perspective in being able to bring labor in a market like this. The alternative option is to do floating LNG, where you could build those things in a factory environment in a shipyard and maybe bring those LNG much faster to the market.
So let's dig into that question around FLNG, because I think that's a really kind of a key one about how we're seeing growth. How can FLNG kind of compete with a sort of an onshore LNG plant where you've got that kind of economies of scale?
Yeah, and 2 things, right? So there are projects which are suited for onshore LNG, but there are projects which I believe if you try to apply the onshore for every application, probably it may not work. And this is basically coming from 2, 3 key aspects. One is, if you have environmental clearances, if you have local issues, if you have labor issues, if you are unable to, get in the kind of equipments which are required for being able to execute those projects. Gulf Coast, for instance, is overly crowded with so many projects, not just on LNG, but renewables and everything else that's going around. Where do you find those labor, actually? The easiest, Canada is another example. You don't have the labor for being able to execute those projects. And some of the projects which have been happening onshore, they're taking 2 years, 3 years, much more longer than what would be normal life cycle for a particular project to be implemented. So if there is a certainty required with respect to getting those projects up and ready and to start producing LNG, and if you have those challenges with environmental clearances, civil issues, labor issues, I think then floating LNG is the best concept. The first floating LNG with Black Veatch build was maybe 10 years ago, 500,000 tons. The market was really not appreciative about whether it will work. but we have scaled the technology. So our first floating LNG was 0.6 million tons for Export Tango. The ones that we are offering today is 6 million tons. So it's been scaled up by 10 times. So on scale and capacity, to answer your question, Ed, I think the industry has evolved. And it's no more just small and mid-scale. It's 6 million tons, 2 trains, 2 vessels producing 12 million tons. It's equivalent to any onshore LNG project today.
I suppose, I mean, I can see the appeal of being able to sort of, float in kind of equipment like that. But I think that there's also that kind of question, isn't there, around sort of local content, around kind of making that case for kind of local labor. And I think, we're here in the Middle East, we see that kind of, call for sort of, local in-country value, they call it here. But obviously we see this kind of playing out around the world. How do you see sort of FLNG kind of playing into that?
So the local content issue is of course, maybe what I call a more political issue, because, I mean, how do you bring the stakeholders into equation? How do you help them? And as I said, not every project might be a good fit for offshore floating LNG. Right? There are projects which probably demonstrate a lot of value having it onshore. And if the demand and availability of labor is there, and then you can find those labor and have those local contents, by all means, I mean, maybe onshore LNG makes sense. But practically almost 70–80% of the projects today on LNG, they have challenges on labor. So when the system is asking for having local content, it's not the labor. There's definitely a possibility of bringing those people in and making them part of the overall equation in whatever way we can maximize the local. But when you weigh the total cost-benefit analysis, I think many of the projects don't really make sense of going onshore, actually.
Thinking about that kind of question around FLNG and growth, right, which I think is kind of really important, and it feels like a really kind of a growing area, as you're saying, that sort of this scaling up. Looking into the crystal ball, where do you see FLNG in sort of, let's say 5 years' time?
Yeah. So the time for floating LNG has come. I mean, in the last 10 years, or rather last 8 years, we did 3 floating LNGs. And in the last 2 years, we signed 2, we are building those 2. And the next 2, we believe that we will do another 3, 4 more. So it's kind of, the confidence in that particular market is increasing. The price levels have stabilized. The technology with respect to how you can scale up this capacity and bring these economies of scale has become a lot more stronger than what it was in the past. So the industry believes in that. There are more and more people who want to try it out. Even the international oil majors who are very suspicious with respect to, hey, whether a floating LNG will work, now are coming and talking to us and want to explore it further. So I'm very optimistic and very bullish about it.
I suppose another thing that we've been thinking about recently is sort of decarbonisation, right? And it feels like, looking at some of the kind of the pressures around the world, this is going to be a growing issue. How do you think decarbonisation works in the LNG space, and I suppose particularly in the FLNG space?
Yeah. So there are two ways that you could decarbonize, right? One is the process itself. So most of the LNG, which is there in the market today, they're gas turbine driven. Obviously, I mean, how do you reduce the footprint of that? So whether you can maybe have an electric motor operating those liquefaction trains. So Cedar floating LNG, which you're building today, has got the lowest carbon footprint because the trains are electric driven. The power which is being used for driving those electric motors are coming from hydropower. And obviously, I mean, that brings in a lot of, economies, not only in terms of being able to utilize clean electrons, but also what we have done is in the overall liquefaction process, we have also put some more mechanism to reduce those carbon footprint. So I believe today, Cedar floating LNG would be having the lowest carbon footprint of all the projects. So there are a lot of opportunities which you're working. The other aspect is the gas which is being used to produce the LNG. There are opportunities for being able to take out the carbon in that and reduce the footprint there. And we are working on both. So there are technologies which are being worked on. We have been able to amplify that usage of electric motors. So there are multiple projects that we have. We're also looking at Western following the electric motor drive option. And then I think there is an opportunity there. But again, there will be projects which will probably make more sense because if you don't have clean power, maybe it makes more sense to use gas turbine drive. But wherever you have an opportunity, maybe use electric motor.
And I suppose looking ahead to let's say 2030, how does the mix of fuels look? How does LNG look? What's the house view?
So we feel until 2030, because most of those projects on LNG, they go from a feed stage into maybe the conventional route of going through pre-feed, feed, and then FID. I think we have enough capacity for which feed has been done to keep us going until 2030. We are looking beyond 2030, maybe next decade, 2040. We're scaling up our resources. We're scaling up the way we execute those projects. The business model has evolved. I think there is a lot of standardization that we have been able to bring. We're also looking at how could we digitalize those modules that we build on the liquefaction train and make them maybe, our Preco technology, which has been there in operation for several decades now. We call it Preco plus, 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 and that plus keeps on getting added.
Perfect. Narsingh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed.